Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome. Welcome back to our centenary festival of holism and evolution. This is day 3. My name is Michael Stock, and Claudius asked me to say a few words at the beginning and the end of each day. It would help us, by the way, if you could please put where you are from in the chat and the question you are holding. So take a moment for that, please. I'd like to say a few words to very briefly recap just yesterday when we heard from Jeff Bloomberg speaking personally, and I think for everyone, I was so impressed with his long labor of love to understand Jan Smuts over 10 years from his writings. We've had wonderful feedback. I wonder what resonated for you. For me, I think there were four highlights from what Jeff said. The first was Jan Smuts was looking for an idea of God to replace the supernatural father, and so holism as mysticism. Two, Smuts' approach to seek a sort of synthesis of all the deep thoughts from the key thinkers, including some of my old friends, from William Blake to Walt Whitman. Three, that what we were thinking we were going to hear about, which was the missing sort of sequel sort of book, had actually been in plain sight throughout Jan Smuts' life. And fourthly, what stayed with me was the poetic and what I also think is the urgent attention to nature's point of view, the unseen. Perhaps we might take a few quiet breaths to enjoy and prepare for what comes next. One more. Mississippi, I am told, is the right word to hold if you're trying to breathe for the right amount of time. We are so pleased now to hear Marcus Link following on so very well from what we heard yesterday about keystones and pattern of place. Yes, would you kindly introduce Marcus to us all?
Thank you, Michael. It's a great delight to introduce Marcus. We've walked this journey together for a number of years. In fact, we walked a physical journey in Italy a few years back when we shared a space with 12 men on a walk in the spirit of St. Francis of Assisi. And together with us was Ahon Huss, who's also part of the Holos core group. And at that time, Marcus was saying, I'm actually a poet. I'm actually a poet. And wonderfully, out came his book of poetry, Inkblot Moon, the complete quantum poetry. If that tells us anything, we're looking at an amazing eclectic thinker, a philosopher, a systems thinker, a poet, and somebody with a deep, deep passion for holism, for unity, and for the key word regeneration. So with no more needed from me, it's a great, great pleasure to say, Marcus, you're on. And you're still muted.
Thank you, Claudius. Thank you, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. My full given name is Marcus Demetrius Link, and I'm a writer and entrepreneur. I live in the southwest of England, in the countryside, along a narrow and winding lane among meadows and woodland, with my family and other animals outside of Ashburton on Dartmoor. In my life and work, the subjects of wholeness and regeneration are inseparably connected themes. And in this talk tonight, I'd like to tether the subject of wholeness to the ground beneath our feet. And I want to do that by way of introducing you to a book that has chosen me as its author and which remains eternally almost completed. It is called Keystones in the Patterns of Place. In my working life, I came to regeneration through co-founding a company called New Foundation Farms. We pursued an approach to growing food which we called radical natural. Our vision was nothing less than the transformation of the food supply chain from an input-intensive to a knowledge-intensive approach. Sadly, the company closed last year. Today, I co-run Ecological Intelligence, a startup agri-tech company that gives land stewards land health diagnostics and actionable insights relating to ecosystem functioning for every field and parcel of their land. It uses satellite and geoinformation data in an entirely new way, and it could do that anywhere. For now, we've just started in the UK and Italy. I feel the life inside of me when I'm involved in something radical and big in my own small ways. And that big thing for me is the regenerative knowledge revolution. Once upon a time, they called that wisdom of the land. As my time and health allow, I'm also a member of the Holos Earth Project since Claudius invited me to join in 2020. I'm privileged to have been on quite a journey with him, including, as he said, a real pilgrimage, a real walking pilgrimage with others. Without Claudius, neither this book nor this talk would be here, at least not in this form. He is not just a torchbearer for Jan Smuts and the much needed holistic perspective. In my life, he is one of the few people who are able to listen to what I have to say and to hear what I actually mean, even when I don't. In conversation with Claudius, a strange and glorious thing occurs. He allows my own wholeness to emerge in the space between us. My wish is that everyone should have a Claudius in their life. There are many people without whom this book and I would not be here in this form today. I won't be able to do them all justice, but it won't do to not share my deepest gratitude to Claire, my partner in life, whose loving support in spite of myself is a true blessing. And there is everyone on the Holos Earth team, Chris, Egon, Joshua, now also Michael and Mark van Wyk. There's my partner in business, Mark Drool, and my kindred creative spirit, Richard Wayne. And there's Leon, my son, who is with us tonight, I think, on behalf of the seventh generation, to whom all my work is dedicated. Just one moment, please. I've just been informed that my slides aren't showing. Is that correct? Or can you see them?
I see your slide.
Say
I
that
can see
again.
them.
Okay,
Keystones
good.
and the
We can
patterns.
only see the first slide, Marcus.
Okay, so there's a disconnect for which I apologize, and I'm just going to try and get that right. Bear with me, please.
While you're finding your way there, Leon is in fact here.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, my apologies for the technical glitch, and I'll just walk you through without speaking the slides that you should have seen, and I'll just check that that is indeed the case. So do you see this slide, the radical natural slide?
No, we're still stuck on slide 1.
Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible.
Can I speak now?
Put all that effort in for it to work seamlessly, and then it works well in the rehearsal. And then,
Marcus, would you like to send one of us? The link is at public, and then maybe one of us can see if we can broadcast your slides for you on your behalf.
yeah, I'll do that shortly, just to
Yes.
I'm just in the middle of something. Does that, so can you see radical natural?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So slides are moving now?
Yeah, no.
So you can see Claudius and me?
I see radical natural at the moment.
Okay. This is a very weird behavior because I'm switching through my slides, but how's that?
Yeah.
Now we
Yeah.
Okay.
Now
Okay, wonderful. So I'll get back into it now.
okay, great.
So this was the slide that should have been in the backdrop while I was talking about Claudius. And here is a little slide about ecological intelligence. And here is one of our campaigns from New Foundation Farms. But I'm just going to keep going because I just feel like I'm in the groove now. So the English idiom to take something with a pinch of salt usually expresses a healthy dose of skepticism. Don't take it too seriously, it says. Those who have heard me speak before know that I'm a fan of alchemy. In the alchemical tradition, salt is not associated with skepticism. In alchemy, salt is one of the 3 principles. Sulfur is the active principle, or soul. Mercury is the volatile principle, or spirit. And salt is the body, the substantial residue, the essence that remains when everything else has burnt away. In alchemy, salt is the ash that holds the living pattern. Maybe you can enjoy this talk as a metaphorical smorgasbord of wild ideas. You can have some salt with it to help with any less palatable ingredients or to add flavor to the word soup. So about my book. In many ways, Keystones and the Patterns of Place is a book of other books and a book of questions. One of its questions goes like this. What is it about the story this civilization of ours, Western culture, tells itself that has brought us to the 6th extinction event, the climate crisis, and the Anthropocene? My diagnosis is that it has to do with the stories we tell, even when we insist that we are not telling any stories. It is a book about the stories we tell with our footprint, about who we are, what the world is, and what our role in it might be. About what stories do to us and what we do to the world because of the stories we tell. I come to the conclusion that we have it all wrong with what we think of as story. And I add to that at least 5 other big claims throughout the book. 1, if we don't have stories, stories will have us. 2, the inner stories of a culture and its outer ecosystem are identical over time. 3, before we are colonial unto others, we are colonial unto ourselves. 4. Outer regeneration requires inner transformation. And 5. Imagination used properly is not an instrument of escape, but the organ of encounter. Part 1 of the book sets the scene with me waking up in what I call an imperial cage. This waking up happens with a dream in which I know that not all is well, but I don't quite know how and what I'm supposed to do about it, even though I want to. I am complicit in the catastrophe I am witnessing, and I can do nothing about it. It is somehow also my fault because I am human, because I am alive. In chapter 2, I muse on how I was influenced by some of the great thinkers of our time and how they also gave me a strange feeling. As a child, I grew up in a forest of books. There was no shortage of words, and yet I ended up quite lost. So many words, but not the right ones. Bookshelves are not just full of attempted answers. They are full of the attempted questions that live in us, questions we don't even yet know. Many of the books I encountered were the traces of quests, personal and collective, and I eventually realized it was my turn to pass through the rite of passage, to find myself adrift in a sea of words. A significant example was my encounter with Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. The infolded starry sky on the cover of the German edition, the narrative and what Hawking said in an interview about human beings being just chemical scum, evoked a strange feeling. The edge of the universe was very far away and very significant, and I was here, small and somehow a non-entity. The greater my understanding, the more worthless my existence. So as a boy, I was led to believe the edge of the universe was somewhere very far away. In a universe characterized by separation, it might as well be the most faraway thing possible. Yet I've come to see the edge not as out there, but as an event that never ends and always begins. I am at an edge, which is the edge right in front of me. It runs right through me. The edge is because I am. I am the edge. Instead of paling into insignificance beneath the dome of a vast sky, I am relevant to what happens at this edge by the sheer virtue of being here. I cannot prevent leaving a footprint. My breath, my words, my actions shape the world that shaped me. By virtue of my awareness, another level of possibility opens up. I have agency, and I want to make something of it. I am an agent at the edge, and that is where and how I feel fully alive. From there, it ripples out between us, between you and me and all of us, in ways that shape the world. My contribution to wholeness comes from my particular way of paying attention. Mine is a pattern-saturated, slow-developing kind of consciousness. It works a bit like a photographic plate. It takes in everything that comes towards it and is unable to let a single thing be only that one thing. I sit there staring out of the window as patterns start to emerge long after the initial exposure. I am an autist. In my case, autism means I experience the world through what the clinical literature calls monotropic attention, a way of processing in which all my resources are directed into a single channel at great depth. I am also characterized by alexithymia. There is a whole lot going on in me, but I cannot answer, "How are you today?" because no word or phrase is adequate. But I'll tell you tomorrow in great detail. The dominant culture of the Western world understands autism along with other modes of consciousness mostly as a deficit, a kind of brokenness. It is true that my way of paying attention is not suited to schools, employment, or daylight, and I struggle with most human relationships. But given time and enough darkness and quiet, my photographic plate starts to work on my special interests and reveals the structural correspondence between different ways of knowing the world. Autism is sometimes associated with the figure of the simpleton or fool. But there's nothing simple about either. The fool is not the figure who has fallen short of wisdom. She is the figure who has not been trained out of it. The English painter Cecil Collins described the fool's mode of direct perception as why knowledge, the knowing that precedes and survives all analytical frameworks, how knowledge describes and measures, why knowledge encounters and receives. It is the knowing that lives in the leisure of the soul. I have met the fool in many guises, and there's the chapter dedicated to her role in my life and how refreshing it is to see the world in the ways of the fool. About this way of looking, Collins said, "The fool is not a philosophy, but a quality of consciousness of life. She has become to me like the patron saint of wholeness." Keystones in the Patterns of Place is also a book of convergences across disciplines, as far apart as ecology and depth psychology, fractal mathematics and civilizational history, and more. This is enabled through another symptom of autism called symbolic-literal equation. Whilst regarded as a deficit, to my mind, it enables seeing what is literal, metaphorical, and symbolic much closer together, because I just don't see the separation between them quite in the way I'm apparently supposed to. In fact, I would actually encourage people to look more carefully when they think that metaphors and symbols aren't patterns that affect the world. In any case, maybe the symbolic-literal equation is why, when I read An Experiment in Criticism by C.S. Lewis, an apparently dry book about literary criticism, it turned my life upside down. In it, Lewis says, the problem with books isn't that they are good or bad. The problem is that there are good and bad readers. Bad readers use books by extracting information of what they already think. Good readers get themselves out of the way in order to receive what is on offer. Lewis believed that reading done well is not a way out of the world, but a way into it. The good reader surrenders not disbelief, but self-assertion, so that the work can do its essential work, to enlarge the self beyond its habitual boundaries. He writes, "In reading great literature, I become 1,000 men and yet remain myself. Like the night sky in the Greek poem, I see with a myriad eyes, but it is still I who see. Here, as in worship, in love, in moral action, and in knowing, I transcend myself, and am never more myself than when I do." It was instantly clear to me that Lewis was describing something far larger than reading books. We don't only read books, we read faces, we read landscapes, we read the stars, we read animal tracks in the forest. We can do all of this either as imperial users who extract, or as receivers who get out of the way so that what is actually there can come properly into existence, making us and the world larger. What if I could read the patterns of life in the same way I can read this book? Here's another example of symbolic-literal equation at work. During my research for a larger report on the relationship between ecology and economy, I came across two pieces of writing 158 years apart on subjects as different as 19th century literary criticism and 21st century policy science. But to my mind, they're saying the same thing. One is an essay called The Myth of Regeneration in the August 1860 edition of the New York fine arts journal, The Crayon. Surveying 3,000 years of Western mythologies of regeneration, it finds that regeneration is always hoped for, but never quite arrives. In its own words, Our hope makes the future a magic cave of happiness, and we think it life's business to discover the open sesame, but we find it a shadow that runs before us, a tomorrow that is never overtaken. The 2018 study traces what happens to agroecology when it meets Western-style national policy. Now, agroecology in the global south is a radical social, ecological, and political movement. But through the sluggish ways of Western institutions, only the least radical elements are absorbed into existing industrial agriculture policy. The word agroecology and some of its techniques survive, but its essence is stripped out. The magic cave is the regenerative food system. The open sesame is the word agroecology. Institutions use it as their password, but using the password is not the same as entering the cave. The conditions for entrance haven't been adopted. Land reform, food sovereignty, the relationship with the soil. So the cave is always and forever tomorrow. The shadow runs ahead. That connection is what led me to title the prologue of the book, A Tale of Two Tomorrows, from which I'm going to read you now. Prologue. A Tale of Two Tomorrows. The question is not what you look at, but what you see. Henry David Thoreau. It's inevitable. I have a footprint because I am alive. There's nothing I can do about it. Once I wished not to have a footprint. I was so overwhelmed by the devastating impact humans, including me, can have on life and the only known planet of life, Earth. Then one day it began to dawn on me. I don't have a choice about my footprint because I am alive, and there really isn't anything I can do about it. But there is something I can do with it. There is something I can do with my footprint, with the way I live. This realization changed my life. In many human cultures, the soles of our feet are revered as the places where the soul enters the body. It is in fact why soul and soul sound the same. The sole of your foot is your direct connection to the earth beneath your feet. It is where the soul enters you through that embodied connection, and it is that same connection which also leaves behind your footprint. I have reason to believe that it is not by accident that we use the word footprint as the symbol for the impact we have on the world and for the essence we leave behind of the kind of life we have led. Like bee and bird through their wing beat, it is through our feet and our footprint that we are an extension of the land, just as the land is our understanding, quite literally. Such knowledge of our embodied relations with the world and how they ensoul us has faded a little from our everyday appreciation. Yet however neglected it has become, our soul still speaks to us through such phrases as carbon footprint, even if we no longer quite know what it may mean. This book is about a journey to a place of remembering what it means. Imagine a story written into the landscape by your footsteps, by your footprint, by the way you live. Now read that story backwards and back to yourself. You'll find there's a parcel of space-time, a segment of the edge of the universe, a niche in the ecosystem, a place in the landscape, a point in your community of life where you can put your finger on the live wire and feel the pulse of things. Push too hard and the leaf, bug, relationship, river or forest might lose its life at your hands. Push too lightly and you might lose all sense of the weight and relevance of your own existence, and you find yourself all separate, disconnected and lost. How might you gauge the balance point of your finger on the wire? How might you calibrate the measure of yourself, this fine instrument of the cosmos that you are, in this, your small corner of the living world? Our footprints in the landscape create the patterns of a species that can create more life than it destroys, and that can also destroy more life than it gives. There are these species on planet Earth of a kind known as ecosystem engineers. The beaver takes stream and tree to mesh wetland, and hundreds of species bloom in this fabric. The elephant uproots acacia on the African plain, holds the savanna open for grass and grazer and also predator, digs dry riverbeds with trunk and foot until water rises, and carries seeds 100 miles in her dung. The tree grows root and canopy and is itself the habitat, bark for beetle, branch for bird, leaf fall for the soil, and underground a fungal web through which the forest feeds its own, tree by tree. And there are the apex predators. The wolf chases deer across the mountainside. The leopard stalks the impala through the African bushveld. The lion hunts the wildebeest in the savannah. In their footprints, woodland and pasture rise skyward, and 1,000-fold of creatures above and below buzz, swirl, and crow. There's this farmer in Brazil who stopped feeding his plants and started feeding the soil. He found himself joined by 6 species of termite who had moved out of the forest and into his fields, where before there were none. And 9 species of ant, where before there was one. And that one, it had been a pest, promoted now to soil food web collaborator. Leaf cutter ants stopped cutting his crop and instead took away only fallen leaves. And fungus returned to the soil as helper, having brought a cousin along who now limits devastation by one parasite nothing else can restrain. 244 species of bird have come to nest and feed on this farmer's land. More than 540 species of arthropod. There's puma, ocelot, and jaguarundi stalking through the rows of crops, even the rare Brazilian wolf. Armadillo follow termites, capybara and deer the waterways, where the jabiru stork hunts baby alligator, and the python warms its 7 meters of body in the sun. 300 plus species of bird, mammal, and reptile on a sugarcane plantation that yields a quarter more sweetness than where they still use chemicals. Such species all have a footprint, and when their footprints leave behind more life than they take, they are known as keystone species. Keystone species in an ecosystem are like keystones in the architecture of a bridge. In one way, they're just like all the other stones. In another way, they create entire corners, maybe more, of the universe, teeming with life that would not exist without them. Now, when I looked at my footprint and compared myself to any keystone being, I found that behind my footprint patterns in the outer landscapes, there were hidden these 2 kinds of patterns in my inner landscape. There are these 2 kinds of stories we human beings tell ourselves about who we are, what the world is, and what our role in it might be. I call one of them the story of no story, and the other the story of another tomorrow. Sometimes it helps to have an image to make something understandable that is otherwise quite complex. And I hope the following 2 maps can help us with that. Map 1, of the world according to the story of no story, as told by human geopolitics of nation-states. In contrast to the dominant story of social evolution, not everyone agrees that the modern nation-state is the destination of human history. It may be only a particular and more recent blip. Some say 250 years in the making, some say 3,000. Seen plainly, the nation-state is the fusion of 3 forms of domination that for most of the human past did not appear together. Sovereignty, or the monopoly of violence within a territory, bureaucracy, or administrative control of information and populations, and competitive politics, or the contest for authority. This template has only become universal by sealing off the 3 freedoms human beings exercised for most of our existence before that. The freedom to move away, the freedom to disobey, the freedom to make a different arrangement somewhere else. Every patch of land now belongs to some state or other, and there is nowhere left to go. This is how the geopolitical map became the map of the story of no story. The borders and the passports and the census forms understood not as artifacts of one peculiar, arbitrary and recent political template, but somehow as the natural surface of the planet, as evolutionary inevitability and the only proof of identity and belonging. And somehow, quietly, the 3 freedoms have become footnotes in the story of another tomorrow, displaced backwards into a primitive past made up of nomadism, tribal egalitarianism, small-scale indigenous ways of being, romantic idealism. Dream on, that was childhood. We have grown up. But the water and mineral cycles, the solar energy flows, the larger than human community was not consulted. Neither were most human peoples. The United Nations, as currently constituted, still awaits the inclusion of the nations of the indigenous First Peoples the world over, and the nations and kingdoms of the natural world that make up the larger than human community. Beneath nation-state borders runs another map entirely, drawn not by treaties, but by topography and water. Rain falls on a ridge, gathers into watershed and river basin and ocean floor. This is map 2 of the world according to the story of another tomorrow, as told by the life sheds of the natural world and their aquifers and river basins. On this map, the missing nations appear at least by implication. The Salmon Nation, the Oak Nation, the Beaver Nation, the Sami, the Dine, the Aboriginal nations of the songlines, each in its own watershed, each speaking its own dialect of place. The 3 freedoms are alive here in the flows in which water moves, in which soils through plant life gather up sunlight, and life flourishes between river basins below and sunlight above. The freedom to move is to follow the watershed. The freedom to disobey is to answer to the river basin before answering to bureaucracy. To make a different arrangement somewhere else is to find the people of one's own kind and life shed, human and other than human. But here is the thing, there is a trap. The moment map 2 is held up as the alternative to map 1, it curdles into fantasy. Watersheds turn into administrative units requiring governance and management layers with policies and hierarchies. Unique life sheds turn into globally uniform sustainability programs. First peoples turn into stakeholders. The larger than human community turns into ecosystem services. The vocabulary of the second people is wheeled in to manage the alternative. Map 2 is still called Map of the Life Sheds of the Natural World and its aquifers and river basins, but it no longer represents an encounter in the unique ways of the unique places that constitute life. This is why this is a book about how the stories we tell ourselves transform what we see when we look at the world, and how what we see when we look at the world transforms us. When a story captures you, when you are inside of it but do not know that you are, it does not transform you, it uses you. Imagination cut off from the living world becomes fantasy, the projection of needs onto a reality that cannot answer you back. When, on the other hand, you stand in right relationship with a story as its teller, rather than its captive, then something else becomes possible. Imagination recovers its older, timeless function, not as instrument of escape, but as organ of encounter, a way of receiving the world and not merely using it. This book is not a map, but it offers a compass to help your footsteps find your way, to help you ask the most existential of questions. What kind of storyteller am I with my footprint in the landscapes of life? How may my footprint become of the keystone species pattern kind? How may I become a keystone in the living patterns of place? The Tale of Two Tomorrows is an invisible bind that imprisons us. Its two stories give us what looks like a choice between right and wrong, but which is which depends on where you stand, and neither breaks through into reality. Both reinforce the imprisonment and in an uncanny way make it bearable by focusing us not on today, but on tomorrow. Before we are colonial unto others, we are colonial unto ourselves by the nature of the stories that we host. Keystone species, on the other hand, are not hosts of stories, but storytellers. Keystone species tell a story about the living world through the way they live, with their life, with their footprint. They are in direct contact with life and the natural world. Their footprint is not a policy framework or sustainability program. It is an encounter. To be a storyteller, not a host of stories, requires a particular faculty, the faculty of orientation. Orientation in this sense is not about geography. It is about that which mediates our relationship with geography. The faculty that lets the world arrive in us in the first place. Henri Corbin called this faculty the imaginal. Corbin was a 20th century French philosopher and scholar. He spent his life trying to recover for the West what he called the vertical dimension, the axis along which a human being is aligned with orders of being that the modern scientific gaze has flattened into a single horizontal plane. It is not that the West disproved this dimension as such. It has just been relegated to the realm of the story of another tomorrow. What counts as real has been redefined in such a way that it now excludes the mode by which the vertical can be perceived. Most cultures know the vertical, and their relationship with the compass expresses the particularities of their vertical dimension. The Native American medicine wheel, the Tibetan mandala, the Australian Aboriginal songlines that hold direction as song, the four quarters of the Inca Empire, the four sky bearers of the Maya, the four sacred mountains of the Hopi, the Chinese four symbols of the night sky, the four heavenly kings of Buddhism, the Egyptian four sons of Horus, the four evangelists in the corners of every European cathedral, the four winds of the Maori, the four Slavic. I hear some other voice. Is there an interruption, or can I carry on? I'll carry on. Linguists who have studied Aboriginal languages, like Gugu Yimithir, found that for its speakers, the cardinal directions are embodied in their sense of language. To ask someone to move in their seat, a Gugu Yimithir speaker says, move a little to the east, or west, or north or south, as appropriate. A child of 3 already knows the cardinal direction of everyone in the room. The compass there is not an outer instrument of navigation. It is an embodied faculty of orientation. There's a long list of such peoples and traditions who have at their heart the fourfold structure of the compass rose, which represents and mirrors back the lived encounter with the cardinal patterns of the cosmos at an individual and collective level. Iain McGilchrist helps us see how the imaginal realm works at the level of the left and right hemispheres of the human brain. The two hemispheres are not specialized so much by content or function, but by mode of attention. The right hemisphere attends to the world as a living whole. It's open, present, embodied, in context, and alert to the new. The left hemisphere tends by breaking the world into parts. It focuses, it abstracts, it names, it readies things for manipulation, and both are absolutely essential. Proper functioning is a three-stage cycle. The right hemisphere engages with the world first. It hands its experience to the left for analysis. The left does its work. Then the left returns what it has made back to the right, where the parts are reintegrated into the living whole. Right to left to right. Whole to part, back to whole. The right is the master. The left is the emissary. When this works, the emissary serves the master, and the world stays alive in our attention to it. McGilchrist puts it like this: the qualities of the world that come to your attention are determined by the qualities of the attention you bring to it. Corbin mused that Western culture had lost its way with the compass and wondered when this happened. 3 chapters of the book travel back 3,000 years across many disciplines to find out. By way of cutting that journey short, I will focus on some key examples. McGilchrist's view is that Western civilization has become dominated by the left hemisphere at the expense of the right hemisphere at least 3 times in Western history. He says, in the case of the Greeks, the Romans, and the post-Enlightenment West, the decline of civilization has been associated not just with more left hemisphere ways of thinking, but with forms of military, economic imperialism, and the consequent overextension of administration, a coarsening of values, and a failure of vitality, vision, and integrity. McGilchrist calls our current version of this the Hall of Mirrors, a system that can only reflect its own logic back to itself, where every proposed solution reproduces the framework that created the problem. Technology, management, and bureaucracy self-replicate, creating more technology, more management, more bureaucracy, and humans end up serving the structures which once served them, with the result that we are no longer capable of seeing intuitively beyond the hermetic world that the left hemisphere has set up, because the capacity to do so has been largely drained from our way of life. Max Weber, the German sociologist, traced the same arc across 3 millennia, which he called the long arc of disenchantment. From the plurality of the gods in polytheistic early Greek antiquity to Western monotheism, Protestant work ethic, and on into the age of science. Science for Weber is a fundamentally nihilistic exercise because it has no way of making meaning. It is therefore inevitable that Western culture became increasingly dominated by rationalization, bureaucratic control, and meaninglessness. The crisis of modernity for Weber is a loss of human agency, which has been replaced with an institutional way of life. We have arrived in an iron cage, which is Weber's version of McGilchrist's Hall of Mirrors. To get out, even temporarily, meaning must be willed from within, but this is hard when the cage actually dominates your ways of thinking. It is not only an outer cage. Before we are colonial unto others. I don't expect you to read this slide in detail. It's here to illustrate many of the layers of the 3,000-year arc through Western cultural history I trace in the book. They include the banishment by Socrates of Dionysus, the twice-born god of regeneration, as the irrational, savage, feminine, and demonic. The distortion by Socrates of the god Apollo into the god of rationality, which became scientism, technocracy, the cult of algorithm. The great severance of the philosophical method from its necessary initiatory grounding by Plato. The invention of the myth of universal human progress as a single linear arc. the secularization of paradise into progress, the secularization of the fall from paradise into entropy, progress's twin, the creation of the personal carbon footprint by BP to distract from its own institutional emissions, the conflation of place-based problems with global action. There are two particular examples I've picked out I want to share a little more about. Joseph Henrich is an evolutionary anthropologist at Harvard. His book, The Weirdest People in the World, makes a claim that upends a century of psychology. WEIRD is Henrich's acronym. It stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic. His claim is that the people who answer to this description are psychologically peculiar by global and historical standards. Highly individualistic, self-obsessed, control-oriented, non-conformist, and analytical. On measure after measure, they sit at the extreme end of the distribution. It is not a normal kind of psychology in human terms. Most people who have ever lived have not been like this. The reason is to be found in our institutionalized way of life. One example is how the medieval Catholic Church introduced a program of marriage prohibitions from the 4th century onward, banning cousin marriage and dismantling clans. Over a millennium, dense kin networks were replaced by smaller nuclear families. From those families came the guilds, the universities, the impersonal markets. Henrich also unearths what amounts to a psychological scandal. He shows that 96% of experimental psychology has been drawn from European, North American, and Australian weird demographics. 70% of these are American undergraduates. The data we have used to make generalized statements about human psychology comes from people who, on the global distribution of psychological traits, don't represent the species. They are the exceptions we have mistaken for the rule. The mechanical clock, Lewis Mumford wrote, is the mother of all machines. It was born around 1330 in a European Benedictine monastery to enforce the 7 daily offices a monk could not miss without sin. The clock made the rhythm of devotion exact. Hours became fixed in length for the first time and separated us from the natural rhythms. Qualitative seasonal time became uniform metronomic time. Once invented, it spread across 40,000 Benedictine monasteries in no time at all. Each one connected mechanical clock and bell tower, synchronizing not just the monks' routine, but the communities around them with the beat of institutional time. Soon the clock left the cloisters and bell towers spread across the town squares of Europe. The timepiece, one of the greatest jailers of human agency, moved into pockets and onto wrists as the prosthetic organ of time. It was not the Enlightenment that brought about the scientific revolution, but the mechanical clock that rewrote the story of the cosmos. The universe became clockwork. The body became machine. This is left hemisphere dominance at work, expressing into the world its own abstract vision. And once out there, it's obvious that time is a constant, though it had never been one before. This is an example of what McGilchrist's Hall of Mirrors means. Then, with the Reformation, the discipline of monks was universalized and became known as the Puritan work ethic. Time became morally weighted. Punctuality became a virtue. This is what Weber means by iron cage. Hard time becomes hard currency. Time, thus monetized, hardens into factory floors, where with Henry Ford, labor was rewarded to sell soul time for ever less rewarding work. Consumer debt inverted what was once a virtue, to be frugal, to be free, to need little, into a sign of failure, of insufficient ambition, of not being fully civilized. The clock deeply shaped the weird self. individualistic, control-oriented, time-disciplined. In the book, I say that we find ourselves wearing a straight jacket made of mechanical time. We know what time it is, but we don't know what time is. With all this weight of 3,000 years bearing down on our shoulders, what are we to do? Tyson Yunkaporta is an Australian Aboriginal scholar. In his book Sand Talk, he uses the Western trick of generalizing things that are really unique. In this case, he generalizes humans into two types of peoples. First peoples, he says, are indigenous cultures with unbroken continuity with the land. They live by first peoples law, under which nothing is created or destroyed, because of the infinite regenerative connections between systems. Time for them is non-linear, it turns in cycles. The world renews itself. Second peoples, he says, are civilized, city-building cultures, communities that consume everything around them and then themselves. They live by second peoples law, which is a misrepresentation of the second law of thermodynamics applied to the open systems of life. The result is decay, then entropy used to explain the decay as the world around desertifies. Yunkaporta also says that it's not about ancient knowledge, but about ancient ways of paying attention. He is clear that second peoples are not second peoples by destiny. They are second peoples by amnesia. The land is still under their feet. The knowledge is freely available. The crisis is not the end of human capacity to belong to a living world. It is the symptom of a culture that has forgotten how to. Anyone who has taken the first fumbling steps towards being part of a custodial species, in my book, I call them third peoples. Third peoples are those who have passed through the left hemisphere's analytical world and recovered participatory consciousness on the other side. They carry the gift of the analysis with them, but integrate that into a new encounter with a living world. Owen Barfield called this final participation. Final doesn't mean destination. It means the kind of participation that depends on the will and choices made by individual human beings, and on the kind of thinking that has come to be called imagination. Not an impossible return to first people's participation, not an improvement on second people's non-participation, but a new direction of travel. And imagination and orientation are notions that keep turning up in the many different accounts of what we have lost in the historical and cultural arc of the West. I said earlier that this book is meant as a compass and not as a map. Chapter 12 is about how the imaginal realm brings together the inner and outer sense of direction. It attempts to answer the question of how, as third peoples and aspiring keystone species, we might navigate with our footsteps in the landscape of life. Imagine yourself outside, in your favorite hideaway in nature, far away from fellow humans and light pollution. Take in the light as it changes through the day. Sunrise, noon, sunset, and then the dark of no sun at all, maybe illuminated by starlight and moon. The seasons turn around you. Temperatures rise and fall. The rains come and go. The wind shifts direction and quality. Animals and plants emerge, stay a while, flower or graze, retreat. You become part of the perturbations of the year. The patterns of the living world flow through you. You look to the night sky. The patterns above shift with the night and with the season. You begin to see patterns among the stars that carry the quality of the patterns around you. The patterns in the night sky are no longer just stars. Their star symbol patterns above converge with the patterns below, each one waxing and waning with the moon. They begin to merge with your sense of inner and outer patterns of dry and wet, of warmth and cold, of light and dark, of plants and animals, of meaning and purpose. Countless cultures describe in varying ways the ever-same 4 cardinal modes of bringing consciousness to bear without even trying. And these poems and hymns and rituals use the compass rose and the 4 times a day, the seasons and the stars to describe them. In the east, the direction of the morning sun, the communion with the interconnected outer world and the field between things. In the west, the direction of the evening sun, where things have shadows and contrast, the discernment of the essence of other things as things in and of themselves. In the north, the direction of light in the dark, of moon and of northern lights, the inner experience of selfhood, of eternity, of timelessness. In the south, the direction of the full sun at midday, the inner experience of the transcendence of self and of oneness with the world, of regeneration and the cycle of rebirth of life and death. Our left and right brain hemispheres now find their place on the compass as the axis of outer knowing, of brain structure that perceives world structure. The east of sunrise and communion is the master, the right hemisphere's mode of beholding the whole, of embodied knowing, of presence and of integration. The west of sunset and discernment is the emissary, the left hemisphere's mode of discerning the essence of things, of naming and articulation, of serving the whole. There is another axis on the compass. It runs from north to south. It is the axis of the inner phenomenon. For this, I reach for the final book in my book of books, to Friedrich Nietzsche's treatise, The Birth of Tragedy. It describes so rebelliously and awkwardly, but so accurately, what we lost with Socrates. What Nietzsche glimpsed under 3,000 years of clutter was that regeneration occurs between the gods Apollo and Dionysus before their distortion and exile. Apollo, before he became god of the light, was once known as the god of darkness and of dreaming. And Dionysus, before his exile as the devil, was known as the god of abundance and of regeneration. In the north, the darkness of night, Apollo finds his light of selfhood by descending into the darkness. In the south, the full sun at midday, Dionysus, the twice-born god who embodies the union of woman and man, revels in life's abundance and fullness. The one brings to wholeness the transmutation of order into beauty, the bounding of selfhood, articulated wisdom. The other brings to wholeness the transcendence of self into the boundless nature of the world, dissolution, ecstasy, and embodied knowing. They go together like cup and elixir. And you stand there in your favorite hideaway in nature with your bare feet on the ground, at the meeting place of left and right hemisphere, and of Dionysian wildness and Apollo's gift of order, enfolded as a keystone into the patterns of place. And what anchors the winds and the stars, the 4 times of day and the seasons, your 4 ways of knowing yourself and the world, what anchors all of this is the thing we call just stories. The stories you tell with your footprint simply because you're alive. The stories you tell about who you are, what the world is, and what your role in it might be. And you stand there at the center where the two axes cross, in the enlivening field with a live wire of the polarities running right through you. Here is your parcel of space-time, your place on the edge of the universe, a wholeness made by the world that in turn makes the world whole. You feel the pull of each direction to its deathly edge. Apollo without Dionysus becomes the rigid self, the unyielding identity, the iron cage of self-importance. Dionysus without Apollo becomes mass ecstasy, the cult, the dissolution that loses everyone and everyone else. Emissary without master becomes the lifeless algorithm, the dashboard, the sustainable development goal. Master without emissary becomes a dream fog, mystic murk, undifferentiated awareness without articulation. Your imaginal work of orientation is to hold the course of the living center with all four directions in conversation. There's not enough time to go into more depth. I could show you how the compass faithfully shows the orientation of anything humans have ever said or done, from music and food culture to philosophy, and so much more. So let me just show you an outline of the life of Jan Smuts. Smuts, the Veld boy, growing up in the bushveld of southern Africa, sits in the southeast. The embodied receptive contact with the wildness of the land, his body open to the cycles of place. There is no doubt that this is where the seed of holism took its embodied root, between the right hemisphere's contact with life and the Dionysian depth of his experience. Smuts the statesman is at home in the Northwest in the Apollonian emissary mode as an architect of constitutions, drafter of the preamble to the United Nations Charter, wielder of bureaucratic authority. Smuts the writer pulled himself back towards the right hemisphere, tending northeast to write holism and evolution. The book that articulated what he knew deep inside from his days as the Veld boy, bridging it into the idiom of philosophy and science so he could be heard by his audience. My guess is that it would have been a whisper from the southwest of his compass, where the embodied Dionysian encounter of felt, still living in his bones, sought his skill of articulation to complete his full geometry of wholeness and thus give holism to the world. I am certain of it because the Southwest is the territory of the fool, where we can no longer jump over our shadow. We have to step into it, step into the darkness and own our brokenness to make ourselves whole. The Southwest is where we can no longer live with the state of things. We can no longer live in this relationship or this community and close our eyes to what is going on. The real health of life is not a state of ideal functioning. It is the attention paid by the adequate diversity of living creatures to the issues of wholeness that necessarily exist, and in attending, wholeness forms. The psychologist Marie-Louise von Franz said about this simply, "It has to be done with the way one lives, not just with the way one thinks." And we are left with nothing but this burning question inside. How may my footprint become of the keystone species pattern kind? How may I become a keystone in the living patterns of place? Enough talking from me. I am going to hand it back for Claudius, to Claudius.
Michael.
Claudius, before I try to add a few words, how would you like to deal with the questions in the chat?
Let's have the silence, and then we can look at that together.
Thank you. So the invitation is, because we have heard from Marcus such an extraordinary story, may we take a deep moment of silence, please. Half a minute. I'd like to make it a minute because I am still feeling this. One more deep breath. I needed that. Thank you, Marcus. Claudius.
So, Marcus, when you describe yourself as a poet, your presentation was poetic. Now, when you describe yourself as a philosopher, your presentation was philosophical. But back of that, there was a deep systematic thinker, systems thinker, systemic thinker. That, not only in the right brain, but also having the proper dialogue with left brain implementation, the way you use technology. So this encounter with you has been intriguing because it follows the presentation of Jeff, who actually yesterday bridged the gap that Smuts was addressing from Smuts's problems with the world that he lived in to a new open space, a paradigm shift of consciousness. He bridged the gap, and that was described in Smuts's history by Professor Dupisani. What you've done here is you've actually served to bridge the gap now between phase 1 of this festival to phase 2 of this festival, which is going into the liminal space, which is going into the space of remembering, which is going into the space of addressing that amnesia you spoke about. And so when Smuts said that we want to see nature through our own eyes, that's what you were talking about. Being in that one deep evolutionary process. So we will formally thank you afterwards, but we're going to open the space, and there's some very, very interesting questions and observations in the chat box. We'll see how to work with those. But we're just going to open this space to anybody that is moved to respond right now from your heart. Stick up your hand. How do I get my full screen? So I see Mark or Taryn. Mark and Taryn.
Well, I think it probably will be combined because I am speechless, but I just wanted to say that that was phenomenal and it was so much thought-provoking stuff in there. So thank you so very much, Marcus. It was absolutely amazing. I think I screenshotted so many of your slides, and you also had me at, what is the word that I had to go and look up again to show Mark was what?
Alexithymia.
Yeah. Because Mark will often say to me, "How are you feeling?" And I'll be like, "Okay." So maybe that's something I need to look at. It's blind to the emotion. I can't quite express it. I can feel it, but I have no way of explaining it. But thank you so much for sharing that wonderful, wonderful presentation with us. I'm really feeling it in the soft and tender bits. I
Well,
don't
thank
know
you
if
so
you have
much.
anything to say. Yeah.
I do. I also thank you. Oh, I'm a little bit smitten at the moment.
Yeah. I think we're both a bit smitten.
I do have a question though. Very interesting, the left-right axis. Very clear to me of what the roles are, the analytical and the creative. If those are two bland words I can put to it. But the north-south is kind of new to me. And I was actually trying to make notes of it. But I kind of, by the time I was ready to write it down, I lost it, and so I wrote opportunistic and sacrificial, but I don't think I did it justice. And I was hoping you could just touch on a sentence or a phrase for each one.
Well, well, the first, by going back to Apollo and Dionysus, my intention is not to overwrite or write out of history any other culture. What I'm trying to do is focus on the West and go back to the roots of Western civilization and recover there what became distorted as a view. So that's the first thing to say. And I think the very basic way to understand Apollo and Dionysus is that of the inner realm of being a self and going through a life and becoming more and more aware of one's own identity in the world. And Dionysus, on the other hand, is our engagement with the world in such a way where we, as Lewis puts it for reading, we transcend ourselves and yet are never more ourselves than when we do. And this is a total polarity. Apollo and Dionysus don't get on with each other at all. On the Greek stage, they are, there's the choir with the masks on, and there are in the original theater, there is the heroes acting out the play, and they have a bit of a thing with each other, but it's the dialectic between them, the engagement, that just like the left and right brain hemispheres interaction, they lead to a wholeness. Like I tried to say, the Apollo makes the cup and Dionysus pours the wine. And you can't drink without the cup, and you'll go thirsty if you don't have the wine. So it's that's I'd like to not nail it down to specific words, because then you go back into the trap of the Western world of okay, I know that already. I've got a list on my dartboard, but no, it's an inner experience of selfhood information and the transcendence of self at the same time.
Thank you so much. Dr. Elena.
Yeah.
Are you there, Dr. Elena?
She's still on mute.
There we go.
Am I here?
Yes. Can we see you?
I'm clear.
I put it on, but somehow I'm not sure. Can you see me?
We can't see you. We can hear you.
Because I would like to be seen, indeed, because I just would like to bring you an echo from a very southern hemisphere to your compass rose, which we feel here in very specific way. And if we now will be looking at the direction of the north and south, with the southern axis, Earth is slightly shaking when it is rotating. And thus, between of Cape Town and the Cape of Good Hope, when Smuts was born, and between of Johannesburg, when there is a house of Jan Smuts, last Sunday, we were attending parade at his birthplace at Riebeek West. And it will be parade and Memorial Day held on 24th, this upcoming Sunday. So I would like to send you greetings from Jan Smuts' birthplace.
Thank you so much.
Looking upwards from that very roots of serene years, which we all observed and venerated with the Friends veterans and some of his family. And sending you that light and greetings and more to communicate in the future after that salt will be dissolved into soul space and sulfuric, but it's already some sulfuric coming up to you. Our alchemic greetings to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Alchemically received.
Thank you. Jeff. Go, Jeff.
Thank you, Claudius. Marcus.
Hello, Jeff.
One word. Wow. Wow. This is when you have to take a deep breath and absorb what you said. It's incredible. That it's almost like Smuts. I don't know how old you are, but you're not as old as I am. And for such a young mind to absorb what is going on in that way, it's incredible. Just like Smuts was incredible at the young age that he was when he was looking for a new idea of God. You're looking for a new idea of life, and it's equally incredible. So well done. It's absolutely fantastic. I have a couple of comments, and I'm interested in. I hear Blake, especially when you talk about imagination, and I hear Blake and Smuts, of course, because Blake influenced Smuts in a very deep way. I wrote this down. You said imagination is an organ of encounter, receiving the world, not using it. That's very profound. And that is very Blakean. You said thinking that has become imagination. That is deeply Blake again. And I was wondering, are you drawing this from a reading of Blake, or are you just Blake yourself?
Well, very beautiful. Thank you. Very high praise. You know, the way I'm constituted has meant that I've read certain books many, many, many times. In fact, Lewis says the point that the way of the good reader is that you go back to the same books over and over again, and every time it's a new book. You'll know that experience as you've been reading one book more or less for 12 years. But I think I've always been drawn to things that reflect something of me, and I think that's true for all people, is that we're drawn to things that also reflect us, and it's the other way round. That which we encounter is also that which reflects us, and so forth. And so I can't answer your question directly. I can only say that this is it's taken me a lot. I'm 47, and it's taken, when I was 8, I decided that I was a writer. And alexithymia and monotropic attention means that articulating the ideas I had when I was 8 is only just starting now. So I'll think about your question a bit, and when I have a better answer, I will tell you.
Thank you. Klaus.
Yeah, great job, Marcus, to
Thank you, Klaus.
to summarize this. Of course, food and agriculture is also my space that I've been spending a lifetime in, and I'm much older than you are for sure. And it's the more you learn, the more aggrieved you are. But I wanted to point out that the pathologies in our food system are not unique to the Western world. It's historically a recurring phenomena. Think about ancient Mesopotamia that destroyed its soils. One of the most famous examples in the Tigris Euphrates floodplain without adequate drainage. The soil desalinated. You have Easter Island. You have the Mayan culture that vanished. There are many examples throughout history where civilizations that were incredibly successful vanished, because they could not feed themselves anymore because they had destroyed the environmental conditions to grow food. So particularly during periods of growth, when during an intensification of agriculture resulted in surplus food, which allowed populations to grow, and then it collapsed. So we are today in a phase where there's really nothing new about it. We've done it multiple times. The only difference now is it's global. To where before, there was the Mayans, there was one region that destroyed its capacity, that destroyed the capacity of the soil to carry a human population. Now it's global, and so that makes it rather scary. So I'm going to talk about this. Claudius invited me in more detail when our time is there.
I think that's a very pertinent point, and I agree with you, and I disagree with you. I agree with you that there are many cultures that have taken this trajectory, and I also disagree because there are some cultures who did not, but they were nonetheless subsumed by cultures that do that, because the cultures that exploit their soils, they become colonial. They have to go elsewhere if they can in order to subsume other peoples and their land. If you look just at two examples, the Hawaiians and the origins of slash and burn in the Amazon. The origins of slash and burn in the Amazon is not fell all the trees and create grazing land for McDonald's beef burgers. The origin of slash and burn is a very careful regenerative system with a 14-year rotation in which trees are felled, burnt in order to give carbon to the soils, which in the Amazon are very low on carbon. You grow for a year or two, and then you move on. And thus you create a cycle of 14-year rotations that sustained peoples for a very, very long time. And I think it's a danger of the Western mind to try and generalize all of human peoples into the same trajectory that is ours, which is absolutely wrong and dangerous. So I agree with you, but I disagree with you because you need to look at examples of active, positive, successful regeneration of hundreds of years of peaceful existence, of many years of hundreds of years of the kind of life we would like to have, enabled by giving up reading, like the Olala people. They discovered reading and they gave it up again. There's the name of which I forget, a North American tribe that discovered city building, and they gave it up again because they realized they were doing something. There are so many examples that don't exist in our history books. And this is why I gave this talk, because we need to look outside of the hall of mirrors that we are enclosed in, because otherwise we are not holistic. But I also agree with you, Klaus.
Well, one argument doesn't preclude the other. So my example here may be we are talking about indigenous wisdom. We're talking about indigenous cultures who have perpetuated their relationship with nature. Well, Japan is indigenous. They've been on the same island for 4,000 years, and they've been able to just feed plants.
Today's Japan is not indigenous in the way I talk about indigenous. But we should go on. We should have a long conversation about this.
So hold on. Let me finish my sentence, okay? The Japanese have been able to, now that they are diverging from their indigenous roots is a different story. Look at Europe. I mean, you have Italian and Spaniard and the Germans and so on. All of these cultures have lived on their same soil for many generations, hundreds of generations, and survived. So today, with the introduction of industrial agriculture and petrochemical fertilizers, we have put ourselves at risk, collectively here. That doesn't mean
what we're going to be doing when we go into the liminal space where you'll be speaking is we'll be looking specifically at these issues and dialoguing so we can learn together. So, Klaus, you're going to be doing a presentation, and there's going to be a deep inquiry where we're all going to learn. Thank you for that encounter.
I look forward to it.
Okay, Mark.
Marcus, it's so good to see you again. And I, like most people here, I can't even begin to tell you how much I appreciated your talk. It was truly amazing. I'm sitting here trying to process it, and I find myself wanting to make what's probably about a 2-degree shift in one of your 4 directions. And I'm lazy, and I want you to do it for me at some future date. I'd love to hear the same talk from 2 degrees over that's about participation in groups, because the way I listened to your talk, I'm not painting this on you, the way I listened to your talk was one of amazing synthesis and revelation of you, the person. And I'm very interested in your similar talk on when it's a group. I don't need you to do anything now. You can respond to that if you want, but I find myself trying to do that translation. And I'm thinking, shit, maybe I could just get Marcus to do it.
I don't think I fully understand. The response that comes up in me is, I'm a creature of the cave. I'm not a creature of groups. If anything gives me the heebie-jeebies, it's the idea that I'm going to be part of a group. I can do it, but it costs my nervous system a huge amount, and I pay the price for it later. So my natural refuge is the cave in dark and light, and I join the inner world, and which is where this kind of thing happens. There's a huge gap in my life in terms of my ability to translate into the space with other people.
Yeah. Well, that's completely fair, and you and I share that more than you might imagine. 10 years ago, I heard myself very surprised to hear myself say in response to a question, "What do you care about?" Freedom and solidarity, and I had no idea. I never even thought such thought. I had no idea what it meant, and it took me 10 years to kind of your thing. It took me 10 years to figure out that "and" was the key word. And another 3 or 4 years turned into participation. So what I'm really curious after listening to your talk, and hopefully I'll listen to it and read your book a few times, because I'm slow in the same way you are. My ethical stance in the world as a 76-year-old is, how can participation be less problematic and more life-giving? And that was sort of the shift, because I don't think it's much of a shift. I mean, I think, and it's clear that I have to do my own homework, and I can't get you to do it for me.
The important part. Go, Marcus.
I'll just give one response to it, which is I might change my mind on this as I get older, but having got to this place, I feel that this is at the moment the participation I can offer. And I take it that my voice has been heard, and I take it that I've done the work of bringing something together and communicated it in such a way that it has sent ripples out. And it's those ripples that actually make me a participant in it, though I'm doing it from my darkened cave. And that to me makes me feel part of something nonetheless. But it's probably not the participation you're talking about.
That's a perfect answer. I too do almost everything that moves me forward in a cave, and then I step out into the real world and try to get back to my cave as soon as I can after a day in the emergency department or whatever. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. And I know your passion, Mark, of relocalizing creativity and the group. And it's going to be definitely part of our inquiry in the liminal space. With that, I'm going to go to Benita.
Hello, everybody. I'm just trying to get my video to work. Let's have a look at
Can we see you, Benita?
He's trying to go to
Let's have a look if that works. Can you see me? No. I apologize.
There you are.
Oh,
Now
you
we
can
see you.
You were
Okay.
there for a second.
Hello, everybody.
There you are.
So I'm in another deep south. I'm in Johannesburg in South Africa, just down the road from where Jan Smuts lived. So yeah, I just wanted to say I am profoundly moved, and as everybody else has said, I was completely speechless and not sure that I was going to be able to find the words. But I do feel compelled to find the words. So I've kind of followed two, I was going to say parallel, but perhaps divergent tracks in my life. One has been the kind of the hard scientific route. And I worked in a research institution for many years, over the past 20 years. Before that, I worked in the environmental field for a long time. And so, and at the same time, because that was so very hard, I followed a different track where I volunteered in wilderness kind of nature reconnection kind of work. So I just say that just to defend myself and say that I'm not a hard scientist at all. So I trained in science, but I don't consider myself a scientist. And I just wanted to say that how hard the journey through the scientific way is, how immensely difficult it is, and how deeply moved I am by this poetic and eco-poetic presentation of a new kind of way of looking at things. I'm so deeply grateful to have been able to hear this. And it's a balm. It's an absolute balm. And it's given me real hope in a time where I'm kind of, I lost my job 7 months ago because of this kind of, hitting a brick wall, hitting a concrete barrier, and not being able to break through that barrier with the people that I worked with because of this strong left brain orientation. So it's very, very real. And I just feel like you've opened a new window. I also read a lot, and I have read kind of gone down divergent paths, and I have not come across this particular, what I would call eco-poetic way of looking at things. So yeah, I mean, I found the reference that you made to the way that agroecology has been diminished in policy incredibly painful. I've also been working in the food system and agricultural regenerative agriculture space for a while. And so I just really wanted to say thank you, but it just sounds so empty and kind of, one-dimensional. Very deep gratitude from my heart and soul. And I would really like to have further conversations. So yeah, to everybody in the Holos project, thank you so much. And Marcus, for your presentation.
Thank you, Benita. And I'm sorry about the brick wall you hit. And I hope that when you look back in the future, that it will have been the best thing that ever happened to you, and maybe you're on the way. So I send you lots of love for that journey.
Thank you.
Thank you, Benita.
She may want to say something more.
Elena, did you want to come back in again? Dr. Elena?
Yes, if I may, please. Unfortunately, I cannot connect video somehow. It's new computer, so I'm sorry. But something I would like to also come back with about that footprints on Earth. And I work with elderly people in a holistic way of medicine for more than 30 years, and have got the privilege to accompany them in the final stages of life and in the final days of life. And with your presentation, I will take it to my future meditation that footprint, though we have to shake the dust of our feet, but yet when we are ascending, we take the imprint of the earth into the higher spheres. And at the same time, with that elderlies, with the transparency or severely sick people when they are already disembodied and becomes like, childlike in their bodies before they'll depart. Yet very often it will be that hardness on their feet, which also indicate once again what you were stating. It is earth binding organ of ours, which once soften can give us that ascension. And yesterday we were celebrating in Orthodoxy ascension of Christ, and I would like to send it to you as well from South Africa.
Thank you very much. What a beautiful thought. I'll take that with me.
So as I look at the screen here, I see a number of the speakers who are going to be presenting into our liminal space. The next speaker is Dr. Glenn Martin, who's going to be looking at our governance systems very much against the background that you described, Marcus. We have Dr. Anthony Turton, who's not here, who's going to be looking at the watersheds that you spoke about. We've got Klaus, who's going to be looking at our food systems. And that sounds like it's going to be a lively debate, and so it ought to be. We're going to be looking at our employment of technology. We're going to be looking at the human footprint in our build habitat. That's all part of the next phase, the liminal space. And we call it the liminal space because we're going to allow space for the right brain processing to inform us again. And so I look forward to it. You've built the bridge. You've built the bridge.
You've put such a beautiful festival together, Claudius. I know it's lots of people, but you've carried the weight for this. So, and just as you say that, I get goosebumps from how it all fits together. Beautiful.
Thank you for that. Are there any closing comments before we close off?
No more.
Anything that's just on your heart?
Yes, Richard.
Richard Wayne.
This is, in a way, it feels like it cuts against the conversation, but I think an important comment in the chat from Mark is Marcus's book available as yet?
I wish it was. I am still in the process of finishing it, and I decided to give it its own time. But I do hope it will be this year, and I will, in its interest, if I'll just do the thing and ask Claudius to share it with a group of people who attend it once it has crossed the line.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are you saying, Marcus, that the book chose the wrong author?
Maybe.
I just said that because of your own expression. I thought that was also very profound.
Yeah, well, you know, Ursula Le Guin in her book, The Earthsea Quartet, describes how the mage, as Ged, the mage, gradually grows up. He suddenly has this insight at some point, or the master patterner actually speaks to him and says, when we were young, we think that we have, there are 100 paths that could be ours, but as we grow older, we realize that it's just the next step that we take. And this book is one word at a time, gradually coming together. And so it's actually a joy to only have that, if you want, a narrowing of life to just the things that really matter. I may be the wrong one, but it really matters.
So just to let you know, we will promote that book as when Jeff Bloomberg's book on Smuts comes out, we'll promote it. We'll promote it. Andrew. And then we'll go to unmute. There we go.
Well, how's it, everybody? You've got a young man from a place called Durban you probably have been to, and Barry Bear, it's good to see your beautiful face, my dear. And who else do I even know here? I found out about, somehow, Claudius, you showed up in my, I don't know if it was a friend request on Facebook this week. And I hadn't heard of you before, and I didn't know your relationship with Sunrise Ranch and the emissaries of divine light and all of that. That's how I came to be here. And when I looked at this, I saw that our dear friend and colleague Jude Currivan is on tomorrow, as is our other dear friend and colleague David Lorimer, and realized this was family. Oh, so, and then it took me forever. I missed this whole talk. I came for this after chat. I showed up in time. I just couldn't quite find it. Anyway, here I am, and I will just tell you a brief moment of my history and how it relates to Prime Minister Jan Christian Smuts. I was 3 years old in 1947 when my family emigrated from England. I was born in Coventry, to South Africa. I arrived in 1947, pretty significant time because things were just about to change radically in our beloved country. Yeah, so, and this, the depth of Jan Smuts is not something I was aware of. So this is very new to me. So to meet all of you scholars who really, really know what he was about, my wife, who Barry knows very well, and I are in the field of consciousness and conscious evolution, et cetera, et cetera. I have a brand new book coming out, by the way, Barry, called Holo Sapiens. I'm giving a name to what we have to become. From homo to holo, let us become true, integral, awakened humans and behave differently. That's my fundamental message. So it's good to be here, and I will be here tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Nemeka.
Yeah, Claudius, thank you. And just like Andrew shared, I didn't join the talk by Marcus, but I came on board when the accolades were all coming through, and I could hear a little bit from that it was quite a satisfying engagement. So it is said that the reward for good work is more work. And Marcus, I am deeply inspired in my heart, speaking from Krakow, Poland, where I live and study, to suggest to you a little bit more work to do, and that could be in form of taking me up as your scholar. I would like to be mentored by you if you so permit. Thank you.
That is a very wonderful thing to say, and I'll take that with me. Thank you for the question. But there's something that I won't respond to now. that would be well considered.
Excellent.
Lovely.
So remember that all of these recordings will be available. You just email us and we can make all of the material available. It feels as though we're just about there unless there's a last observation.
Yes, can I say something, Claudius? Egon
Yes,
here.
go.
I was so intrigued to just share this with Marcus and go back to the pilgrimage that we once walked together with you, Claudius, also. And I remember when we were walking into some kind of medieval town, and we were talking about your poetry, Marcus. And at some point, I just said, just put it out there. I would like to remind you to that with your book that you are writing. Tonight you basically already gave birth to your book in this community. It's already there. Just get it out there. Thank you so much for your wisdom. I really enjoyed your presentation. It was so much more than a presentation, to be honest. I still don't have the words, but we'll get back to that. Thank you so much.
Mesmerizing. Thank you.
Thank
Michael.
you, Egon. Thank you, Shab.
Michael.
Thank you, Claudius. If I may just say one or two words about what Marcus brought to me, it was like to refer to Benita's wonderful phrase of the eco-poetic. It was like a waterfall of eco-poetry. And thank you so much. The pace of it meant there was so much to think about. And I want to go back to our first day and what I learned from Professor Querbus du Pisani, where we learned of Smuts seeking to bring necessary hope in a post-Great War age of anxiety. Well, I think the world in which we are in now is anxiety plus so many other words we might want to add. And I was heartened by Jeff Bloomberg's reference to nature's view, because for many of us, that gives us hope, I think. But I am still just sitting with the breadth of the wisdom, Marcus, that you referred to. And you ended briefly on Nietzsche, a writer I know a little bit about, who was writing 100 years before Jan Smuts. And the question I am sitting with, really, is Nietzsche's reference to the last men, which is very somber, which is why I'm so grateful, Claudius, that we can look forward after this weekend to transitioning to the liminal space where we might have more time in great company to ask the questions which we are all holding now. So thank you all. Tomorrow starts much earlier. So for anybody who's thinking they just tune in at the same time, at the same place, you'll be a little bit late. So particularly for anybody who is hoping to join from the West, it means the alarm clock or bird song, because tomorrow begins at 10 a.m. Central European time. And that's earlier, so it needs a bit of planning. We love to see you there. And we will be looking forward to a longer morning than we've had in these evenings. We will start at 10 and run through the morning. And we'll hear, as was mentioned, from Dr. Jude Currivan with a unitive vision for humanity. And I, for one, will be welcoming that. And likewise from David Lorimer, where he asks, and we'll talk about inwardness and agency in the evolution of consciousness. And after hearing from Dr. Jude Currivan and David Lorimer, Claudius will be in dialogue with all of the presenters, which will be a very rich morning. So I think you need a packed lunch. So go well. It's been a pleasure. Seriously.
Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that I forgot to mention Dr. John Anderson, who's a paleobotanist, who will be with us also later in the series. Yeah. Thank you so much and good evening.